I should be selfless, I should be unselfish in this dealing, etc. It's considered in Buddhist psychology to be impossible to do that in all situations, or even in the majority of situations, unless you have in fact experienced yourself as non-self, unless you have in fact experienced your selflessness. You have had this kind of face falling off, or it doesn't always have to be face, it could be, body falling off, Dogen might have said, casting off body and mind, the Zen masters said, even mind and body falling off, not just face. But there is a particular stage where one has a kind of suddenly realizes this sort of thing that one was holding out in front of oneself, like the sort of lens of a camera, is actually has no intrinsic identifiability in itself. And it's just, it's sort of a very arbitrary interface, So this is what we're talking about, and it leads to the fundamental Buddhist worldview. It is totally interconnected to the fundamental Buddhist worldview, which is that expressed in what is known as the royal reason of relativity. And that is that all things, you can put the syllogism either way, you can say all things are empty of intrinsic identity, or all things are identityless. That's the thesis. And the reason is because all things are totally interrelated. Or you could put it the opposite way. If you want to emphasize in the opposite direction, you could say all things are totally interrelated. There's no non-related thing at all. Because all things lack intrinsic identitylessness. Identity. All things have intrinsic identitylessness or lack intrinsic identity. It's known as the royal reason of relativity, as I like to call it in English. And it is the fundamental Buddhist worldview. People want to think that, people think if you ask somebody what is the fundamental Buddhist worldview, they say, well, it's nirvana, or it's enlightenment, or this and that, and all that is true. But actually, the fundamental view in Buddhism that the learned Buddhist scholar and yogi will tell you is the worldview of relatedness, actually. That is it. It is the worldview of relativity. Buddha had this extraordinary experience as he was looking for the true nature of the self and the world, where he realized the dissolution of the self as an isolated, independent entity, completely experientially, viscerally realized that. And that means to the degree that, for example, if you meditate about the self and you start to, for example, you do what people will use as fundamental in Buddhism, kind of meditate on the breath, you will kind of feel, that, you have to kind of draw your breath. And that you are drawing your breath from a sort of, whoever's like taking in the breath, that's you, and I've got to like draw this breath, otherwise I'll suffocate. And you'll feel strongly that you're there kind of needing this breath if you sort of hold your breath for a while, for example. But the Buddha's enlightenment of selflessness means that even the notion of there being a self, that it was a sort of a point of origination of the desire for the breath, dissolved. Meaning that technically the state of enlightenment is a state where you do not need to inhale for a selfish purpose. So the definition of selfishness and selflessness goes all the way into the autonomic nervous system, let us say, where Buddha is defined as a person who does not take the air away from us because he needs it or wants it. You realize how profound that is? That's not fooling around there. That's my acid test for any supposed enlightened guru. I love to do it. Would you mind holding your breath for like an hour or two, please, sir? And then you can quickly see, or yourself, you may have a great experience, a dream, or something, I'm enlightened today. Just hold your breath for a minute. In a minute you're going, ugh, gotta have that air, So that means, for example, in a state where the mad scientist put us in a chamber and like pumped the air out and said, there's a time lock on the door, I'll let it out, this is an experiment. Only half of you will get out if you breathe normally. Others will suffocate. And who will be able to let the others out by not using up the air? Which of us? Even the most unselfish of us, what we on the surface level think of unselfish, on the conscious level, who will be able to just, for example, say you're there with everyone is there as your child, you're a grandfather or a grandmother. Even at that age, would you be able, in fact, not to draw your breath so that your grandchildren could live? But this, and I'm not saying that, I don't want to start so choking and gagging, please. I'm just saying that the definition of Buddhahood is that radical. It is a being whose knowledge of the reality of this physical space even that it inhabits is a knowledge of the relationality of that of themselves to everything is such that there is no desire, selfish desire, even on the sort of visceral level of the diaphragm, not just in the brain,